Okay, welcome to the fifth episode of Franklin, the only City Skylines series with a 100% money back guarantee, no techno in the cinematics policy. So I want to start out by saying I heard some people didn't like how I opened the last episode, and I listened, and I just want to say I don't care, and also abolish ICE. So, in today's episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some early public institutions. In our case, we're going to build a hospital and a university. We're also going to build a few government buildings. Now, let's start by talking about what we're building here, which is Franklin Hospital. It's a dual-purpose hospital. It cares for both physically ill and mentally ill patients. They're both in separate wings of the hospital. In the center of the central rotunda is the operating theater, where doctors learn from other doctors how to perform operations and such, which are limited mostly to hacking off limbs. But we're going to talk about that in a second. This hospital is funded by the benevolence of Franklin's wealthiest residents to ensure public health, and it is open to all people. But, like the vast majority of philanthropy, there's a couple catches. In this era, most doctors are still doing house calls because hospitals aren't a terribly great place for anyone to be. If you were in a hospital, something was probably really seriously wrong with you. So hospitals were cramped, they were overcrowded. There wasn't a lot of cleanliness because cleanliness wasn't considered the most important thing at this time. They didn't know what germs were. They didn't know that, say, a dirty medical implement could spread germs from one person to another. They might finish one amputation, wipe off the saw, and then start the next one 5 minutes later. If you were in there for surgery, which again was mostly limited to hacking off limbs, there was no such thing as anesthetic. Ether and chloroform are 50 years off at this point. What you did have was whiskey, and you had a piece of wood to bite. And you had to hope that your surgeon was pretty good. A good surgeon, of course, in this case, was someone who finished quickly. That was the main rating for surgeons. How fast can you hack the limb off? If you're not in for surgery, the medical treatment is still extremely primitive. They're still going to be putting leeches on you in order to balance your four humors. And effectively being in or around a hospital was in and of itself a hazard to your health, since so many people with infectious diseases were being cooped up in there. And the vast majority of the medical treatments which were applied to people in the hospital just flat out did not work. And that's the side for the physically ill people in the hospital. The other half is for the mentally ill people. And the primary purpose of this was to keep the mentally ill off the streets, effectively keeping them in prison-like conditions, which is a little bit better than what was the case before, where they'd take mentally ill people and throw them in actual prisons, which coincidentally is what we do today, but we'll talk a bit about that in a later episode. Now, one method which was thought effective at curing mental illness was pleasant surroundings, which is why I spend so much time doing the grounds here and planting all the flowers and the formal gardens. But that was only one method for curing mental illness. The other methods of treating mental illness were mostly beatings. So the main purpose effectively was to quarantine the mentally ill, and for the physically ill, the purpose was also a quarantine. The hospital kept sick and infected people off the streets to keep epidemics from starting. This especially applied to recent immigrants who frequently came down with infectious diseases on the boat over to America and who needed to be isolated from the city at large to prevent the spread of disease. And if they didn't get disease from the trip, they'd be sure to get it at the hospital. So that was the purpose of, wealthy people donating a lot of money to found a hospital. It's self-preservation. This hospital acts as a giant quarantine facility. Though the hospital was open for all who sought treatment, said treatments were ineffective and frankly often worse than doing nothing. You didn't go to the hospital if you could avoid it. Now, sometimes you couldn't avoid it. You were compelled by a court to go to the hospital if you had an infectious disease. These court orders, of course, had a mysterious habit of missing the wealthier members of society. Now we'll talk a bit about the University of Franklin, which I'm building here. Now, in this era, in the 1790s, not a lot of people went to university. It's not like today where you need a bachelor's degree to flip burgers at McDonald's. Very few people go to university, and very few universities exist. Again, not like today where, there's a university around every single corner. People would travel from far and wide to study at the university, because there were only a few they could choose from. And most American universities, and indeed most universities in general, were primarily intended to educate the clergy. Now, our University of Franklin here offers a few degrees. It offers degrees in medicine, it offers degrees in law, theology, and philosophy. Now, philosophy in this case means anything that isn't medicine, law, or theology. So mathematics or anything of that sort is philosophy. There's no such thing as STEM education. Frankly, I don't think there should be such thing as STEM education at all. The bulk of degrees awarded at this university, though, are in theology, since it's mostly the clergy who are attending. And this is mostly Protestant clergy. There's no Catholics in here. Formal education in a lot of other fields, as they existed at the time, was handled mostly by apprenticeships, and primary education is, it's there, it exists, but not a lot of people take advantage of it. It's not mandatory like it is today. Now, I've made this university maybe a little bigger than maybe I should have. A lot of times in this era, a university would have only 2 or 3 buildings. This has several more. And University of Franklin and Franklin Hospital are small right now, but will play a large role in future episodes. Eds and Meds, of course, today form the rock upon which city revitalizations are built, despite both industries being held up entirely by enormous debt bubbles, which, again, we'll talk about much later in the series. This series will, in fact, contain a few cathartic rants about student loans and medical debt, so, you'll be able to get your catharsis over your insane monthly payments, but it'll be a few months off. The last thing we're building here are a couple government buildings, starting with the State House, which coincidentally is also the temporary capital of the new nation. And we'll sprinkle a few more government buildings around too. Maybe one's a courthouse, maybe another is an annex where clerical work is undertaken. I didn't think about which building was which too much. I'm going for the visuals here more than anything. Now, during Franklin's short time as temporary capital, the Constitution is drafted and ratified, and the Articles of Confederation are thrown out in the garbage. This provides for a much stronger and more sustainable federal government. A Bill of Rights is also included, which is supposed to guarantee rights to all, but effectively only guaranteed rights to white landowning males. Oh well. I'm going to add a couple brick sidewalks around government buildings here, since they will eventually be receiving foreign dignitaries and they need to look presentable, but we're not going to start thoroughly paving the city until later episodes. And after this, I'm going to do a little bit of city expansion and talk about some future plans for the series. Now, next week, I'm going to take a week off to recharge. I feel a little burnt out with the series already. It's only episode 5, and who knows how many episodes we'll get to. So I'm going to try in that time to fill up the queue with some episodes so I can really relax later and, ignore input from people since I've already recorded the episodes. But that's a lot better than today, where I didn't finish the episode until very late on the day it was supposed to come out. The next few episodes will get us into the 19th century, hopefully hitting the Civil War by episode 10. We're going to be talking about the water supply system in episode 6 and start major expansions of the city afterwards. The first railroads will come to Franklin by episode 7 or 8, and then I'm not sure exactly where we'll go from there, but we'll go somewhere. Anyway, on to the cinematics, and see you all in 2 weeks.